All right, and we are live for episode 4 of Occult Podcast, where we do, or at least talk about, inadvisable things in the name of magical science. As always, I am Tyler Cadmian, aka Shadow.
I'm Felix S. Warren. I'm drunk.
Yes, we are a little bit tipsy tonight.
Yeah.
I think you're a little bit more than a bit tipsy, but...
Yeah, I had more than you.
You had more than me. I'm
gonna have more demons in me than you.
Yes, you're gonna have twice as many.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to share the...
Share the load. Oh my goodness. So, yeah. This episode 4, is going to be continuing the summoning discussion that we had in episode 3 with Rob. Specifically, we did our goetic summoning thing earlier in the week, and kind of have been discussing some of the results, but haven't really on purpose, so we could talk about it sort of for the first time on the podcast. So, first off, as the channeler, how was your experience, Felix?
So there was the before, the during, and the after.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for most channelings, I do retain something from the experience of the channeling.
Right.
When the demon is there and I am not, there's still some stuff left over in the brain and body. Thus far. We may reach a point where that's not as much, or not even. And so, for the duration that Rob's demon self, I'd say,
Yeah.
do we call it that? For the duration that Rob's demon self was in here,
Rob's demon self is so intimidating that we're having a car alarm go off in the background right now.
fascinating? I think that's our signal to shut the window.
Shut the window. Close the window on this. That's definitely a thing.
So,
Wait till you come back. The audio is going to be horrible. Yeah, there we go. Reminder for next time. Make sure all windows are closed that are facing the street. We can't close all the windows, but close the window that's facing the street.
So, I would say that Rob's demon self has particulars that Rob does not have, usually.
Yes,
Um,
I would concur.
yeah. I would say that it was a good experience. It was educational. A little intimidating at times.
Yeah, you did also get a lot of information after the fact, which is something that I want to actually discuss with you, because you sort of get sort of filler information because the demon was coming from their own reality with their own understanding of things.
I get the memory of the entity thinking in my brain and having cognizance of stuff outside of my brain, or thinking, usually I know insert thing here, or noticing that they suddenly understand things that are more in this reality.
Right.
So, I get some of the demon's cognizance, and some of it I do not, or rather, some of it I get while the demon is having it.
Right.
But when I say I'm not really talking about I mean that it happens in my brain, and whenever I come back in afterwards, I get to examine that experience. But
Right.
sometimes that whole experience, actually, all of the time, that whole experience is not there. There are parts that are not there. He left some behind.
Yeah.
He took some with him.
Yes. And that is something that is very typical of these type of summonings, is that especially the more traditional types, goetic entities or any kind of summoned entities will leave some traces of themselves in your brain as you're trying, mostly contained into what they're during their experience. So if you're thinking back on that, sometimes you can glean some insights, but a lot of times you're going to find a lot of blanks. You're going to find maybe we were talking about it and then suddenly the channeler trails off and they've totally lost their train of thought. That is totally natural and normal.
Yeah, any entity with the ability level of a goetic demon is going to have the ability to delete specific memories if it doesn't want you to have them.
Yes.
Especially memories that were part of its being present. I'm not talking about memories, any memories. It's like it's shared in that experience, and so it has a lot of control over that, a lot of temporal control.
Yes. Yes. So, and then, so your experience during, I mean, you weren't there, but could you share any insights on, like, the body's experience, if you're cognizant of that?
Let's see. The body was comfortable with the entity being there.
That's always a good sign.
One thing I will indicate is that my body is capable of sending warning signs if it's not comfortable
Yes.
with something being here. And sometimes my body was actually helping the experience of the demon.
Mm-hmm.
My body was trying to be conducive to the experience of the demon being here, giving him comfort sometimes, or just reminding him kind of how to get along in this reality.
Yeah.
Physical check-ins and stuff like that. This body has done so many groundings, has done so many like exercises where it's like, okay, stay in tune with the soles of your feet and you'll start to feel gravity.
Right.
And so my body is very used to reminding entities like, hey, you're in a physical reality. I know it's kind of hard. This is what it's like. These are norms.
Right. You sort of have like a beginner's guide to like being okay with the gravity and that's actually a very interesting point to discuss. We have had entities that have come from different gravity environments, especially those who are coming from the ship, where it's like 90% is good enough because there's enough of that like weightlessness that will carry it the last 5 to 10%. And that doesn't work like that here on Earth with 100% gravity.
Absolutely. I have heard reports that telekinesis is a lot easier in the outer space environment, where you actually have a little bit more give to what's going on, so there's more ability for you to shove things yourself.
Right. So, yeah, that's something that is really great if you become more of an experienced channeler, to sort of like have almost a primer on how this reality works. You know, hey, you're gonna feel, and especially a primer on the body that you're in, especially like if you are we mentioned it before, like, you know, having entities usually just sit still because they're not really familiar with the body, but like in your case, you know, you do have some cognitive things that can trip some entities up.
That is true. You know, in some ways, my body is a trap. We've talked about my brain before. There's a few things my brain doesn't have in it that usually are standard. So my front left forebrain is kind of not there. And that has in it usually your language center. There's hand-eye coordination, a lot of logic stuff. From what I've been able to discern, some of the equipment that's necessary for lying. I've been having that gone since I was basically a toddler. So what happened is that I just sort of learned with my other parts of the brain how to do all that slightly differently.
Right.
So when an entity comes into here, like, they're not usually equipped with the things that they're used to, but they are fully equipped to interact.
Yes. And it's very fascinating to interact as the summoner with the channeled entity in that kind of body, because I can tell there's times where they're trying to reach for some kind of logic, especially if it's an entity that usually in one of these normal summonings, they're not going to completely trust me right off the bat. So they're looking for like logic faults or, things to sort of be able to wiggle out of specific bindings or commands that I've given at the start of the summoning. And sometimes I can see the confusion on their face because they're like, this is supposed to connect to that, but there's no bridge in between. And it's always interesting to sort of catch that, because there's a lot of things that entities can have natural access to being inside the brain and the body, but if they're not used to being inside that specific body, they sort of go off of normal, like, human being norms, and not all of those work for you, Felix.
It's true. I find them often trying to tap the part of me that just kind of knows what normally goes on. Usually they resort to that pretty quickly because they find out there's just no other way to keep going, which is what I found out early in life, trying to use this brain.
Yes.
So, now you wouldn't have to do this with... Now, you at home who wants to try doing this, you don't have to remove your left forebrain.
Highly not recommended. I know we are advocates for magical science, but please don't self-lobotomize. 99.9% of the time that turns out very, very badly.
I'm fairly sure that if somebody prepared themselves with some pre-ritual hypnosis, or simply did a lot of, like, studying from a list of things to do so intently that they really had it in their head, then... the demon would be similarly equipped. I'm not saying fooled, but equipped with the equipment that I have, because usually when they end up in me, they end up a lot calmer, I think, than usual.
Very true. Very true. They don't have quick connections to, like, emotional centers, I've noticed.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I also think that, like, the way that I usually have to go about thought and sort of addressing the reality around me logically, might be a bit calming to them, simply because it makes them pause for a moment and think.
Yes.
So they're less reactive.
Yes. And getting anyone, entity, person, out of their amygdala and out of the reaction zone and into the thinking zone is always a good thing.
Absolutely. So the amygdala is like the reactive part of your brain.
Yes.
It's not quite in the center. It's actually two separate parts, sort of near the center.
Yeah.
And the amygdala is often responsible for psychic behavior and psychic ability.
Right.
It's very powerful. It has a lot of abilities that are very important, but it has the ability to drive the car on its own even when it can't see the road.
And that's not something you want an entity to really have access to while channeling. So it's kind of great that you sort of have that shortcut off by default, I guess.
It's interesting that historically the mentally handicapped have often been used as channels for entities, especially demons. With I think the justification that it's less likely that entity will be able to do harm from that body. I would call a mental handicap.
Yes.
My mental handicap, I feel, is enabling. I mean, I've gotten to the point in my life where I've, enabled myself a lot of ways. I pass that on to the entities that come up in here.
Right.
And so they have a different way that they have to go about doing and being, but most of them seem to report back with, they seem to be okay with it.
Right. It doesn't seem to be destabilizing. It's just sort of like, it's very interesting that it does tend towards a more logical, rational discussion instead of emotional fueled, which is something that I always sort of brace myself for, because the type of goetic summoning is kind of aggressive. And I mean, you're demanding that someone shows up, so they're not always going to be in the best emotional state of mind in those kind of circumstances. So,
yeah.
Anything else you want to share on your experience as the channeler?
I could tell before this one, there was some kind of vibe that I was getting that it just seemed like it was going to go different than we expected.
Yeah.
But I didn't get the sense that we should stop or not do it. Mm-hmm. You suggested that we go ahead and do it that night when I actually thought we wouldn't. And I checked in with my body, with my sense of precognition, and my general sense of intuition.
And I mean,
I think we draw cards. Yeah,
we always draw cards. Are you kidding? Tarot is always going to be a part of our discussions.
It's a little hard for me to remember everything that happened before this because a big time warp entered into my body afterward.
Yes.
But the signals were go ahead.
Yes.
And after the fact, I still agree with those signals.
Yeah.
So that's really as much as I can say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you want to have the person who was channeled into us come up, or do you want to have the person who was monitoring him come up?
I think I would like the mantis who was monitoring to come up, because I would love to hear his side of the story before we talk to Rob.
I was wondering if that would be the case. So
yep.
I'm going to have Mantis come up next.
Give you a chance to do that. As always, Felix is actually switching out physical tokens because that helps him and his body focus when we're doing more of these channeling instead of summoning. A lot of this is being directed internally rather than being directed by an external source. So sometimes he does need a couple of minutes, and that's usually why I'm chit-chatting. It looks like, yep, Mantis is going through his grounding exercise like he introduced to everyone in episode 2. If you're interested in that, take a look on... I believe that is still not quite getting pushed to RSS feeds, but you can check out either the VOD on Twitch or the backup on YouTube to check that out. Look for the Spaceman.
Look for the Spaceman.
Welcome, Mantis. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey. First time I've been on this podcast, a little tipsy.
A little tipsy, I know.
Actually appreciate it a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's, I guess, talk about the monitoring setup that we had.
I would love to know how you set that up on the ship. Like, we have not even... For those who are listening, we haven't even talked, like, really about any of this because it happened earlier in the week, and we were sort of waiting to compare notes until we were on stream. So, Mantis and I have not even talked about this, so I have no idea what your setup was like, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed some things, but we've kind of kept this topic off limits, and I really appreciate that because I feel it's more scientific to discuss the results for the first time in this setting.
Yes.
So, up on the ship, we basically have the same kind of monitoring equipment that you would assume is in a modern hospital of yours.
Okay.
We might have something different going on, but it results in the same thing.
Essentially, like, I mean, we can get into details about that, but I feel like that would just bog things down. So you've got, like, cardiogram, you know, blood pressure monitoring, heart rate, oxygen levels, those kind of things. Brain activity?
So brain activity was definitely a part of it. We're able to watch the different waves, as it were. I was very interested to see whether he would go into delta waves at a certain point, certain sleep patterns, certain... would he go into rapid eye movement sleep, for instance?
And On your end, I don't have as good of a telekinetic connection to the ship as Felix does. So I didn't even know on your end of things whether you got a heads up of when, the channeling, or not the channeling, when the summoning began. So did you have any heads up from Felix, or were you just sort of waiting and watching?
So I do have it is possible for me to monitor Felix and see where he is with things. And that was available. I had the connection to check. Now, I decided to watch my equipment primarily instead of kind of sitting in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was curious. Could I measure it?
Could
I watch it happen
mm-hmm.
on that? Now, a couple of things that I'll make observations of right off the bat. It is difficult to get instant monitoring of an event that is non-linear temporally.
Yes.
So we had, Rob has all of us, because I am an incarnate demon as well. Rob is an incarnate demon. We are humans with bodies who also do demon stuff. We have our own effect on linear temporality. We make our own little time warps every now and then. I'm sure people have heard a couple of the pops and whistles that have happened while we're talking or doing certain things on the podcast before.
One of the really things to listen to, I'll just say in general as a hint, listen for skips or where inexplicably the audio just speeds up. Or it seems like someone just started talking really fast all of a sudden. I'm telling you, 95% of the time, the person was still speaking with the same tone and the same tempo, but the recording sped that part up. And it's always interesting to listen back.
Yeah, so definite sync issues, I would say. And so, when it came to my equipment, I didn't lose anything.
Yeah.
And no big problems happened.
That's good.
Just like Felix said earlier, no malice felt by his body and all of that. Didn't feel necessarily malice up there. I did feel an edge of something, sort of with something to prove.
Mm-hmm.
And so the monitoring was not quite in sync with what was going on.
Right.
Sometimes the equipment was taking a long time to register measurements that usually would be faster. I could tell the equipment was not responding the same speed-wise.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get any big warning signs throughout the entire experience.
That's really good. Yeah.
Big warning signs, by the way, would be, for instance, cardiac arrest. If someone has a heart attack, that's a big warning sign.
Yeah, that's certainly an extreme warning sign. I would say elevated heart rate, heavier labored breathing, probably unexplained spikes in brain waves or any kind of thing that would exhibit like anxiety, panic, any of those kind of signs would probably be good things to look out for. And those would also be exhibited similarly in the body as well. Like anytime if you are summoning and have the channeler, the body in front of you, watch for labored breathing, watch for any sort of like inability to focus suddenly. That could be a sign that the body is having some kind of reaction to the entity that is being channeled.
A good measure to go by is if you, maybe some of you out there have actually taken a CPR course.
Mm-hmm.
If you look up the guidelines for CPR on whether or not you should use it on someone, the warning signs for whether someone needs actual CPR intervention, I think, are very similar to the warning signs you're looking for. So not only the labored breathing, confusion. Now, if they're like actually ambulating, then trouble walking around.
Right.
Now with Rob, he was basically often people recline, but he was sitting up.
I was gonna say.
Rob usually sits up.
Yeah.
he was, I'd say, much more relaxed. Not just relaxed, but like he was obviously in a deep state of trance, close to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And he usually, that is not what it is like for him whenever he just channels into Felix, say for this podcast.
Yeah.
The process via which we're channeling through people here is essentially a kind of focused telepathy and what you would probably call astral projection.
Yes.
We're just choosing to do that and projecting out to a body and utilizing that body with permission as directed by a doctor.
Hope you guys are eating those apples.
But for a summoning, you go through a very specific ritual that causes an entity to be in the body and stay in there.
Yes. And
also be present as this ultra-dimensional deity.
Yes.
Basically. And so it's much different than simply projecting a physical person's personality into your body.
So we talked about different dimensionalities like 3D, 3.5D, 4D, stuff like that. I'd say you, Mantis, and Rob are more on the 3.5 to 4D level. Now, I will say, as the summoner, the entity that I spoke to when summoning, quote-unquote, Rob, was definitely more on the 6D level. And very, very different experience than everyday talking with Rob.
This might be my first time monitoring a six-dimensional being. It's a little hard to prove whether or not it's happened before, so it's definitely the first time on the record. And the readings were very strange. Sometimes I could just tell that the readings weren't coming through properly through the equipment.
Right.
That essentially the interference was more on the electronic side than something happening to the body. Now, part of the reason I could tell that is because I didn't just have electronic monitoring equipment. I have my psychic abilities, and I was closely monitoring Rob, monitoring Felix a bit from afar, and sometimes just comparing those two, seeing if there was any correlation. My senses were more accurate and reliable than the electronics.
And that is something to bring up, especially in any kind of like paranormal investigation. It's very interesting how much people want to use the electronics and divorce it from, human interaction, I guess, or human experience.
They assume that once you rely on electronics, you've completely eliminated human bias, and they assume that human bias is the biggest obstacle in their way.
Right.
The thing is, humans made the electronics, so there are some human biases that are implicit in the operation of electronics, and one of the biggest human biases implicit in those electronics is linear causality.
Linear time. Yes.
Time itself. They often... Electronics often assume that time is just going to happen the regular way.
Yes. So, yeah, that was definitely a very interesting experience. One of the things that I was very surprised at, as it felt like it went on a lot longer than it actually did. I swore that it was like 45 minutes to an hour, and it was not that long. I didn't check the exact time, but like I was surprised that like we came out at like 35 minutes afterwards.
Now that was interesting. Time stamping was a little weird on some of the equipment. I had to compare with some clocks that were nearby, some not just clocks, but also some just time measuring devices. And then I compared with the ship clock. I compared with a couple of other ships that were nearby. And there was a point to which the radius stopped affecting things, but you would have like there were electronics on the ship that were affected that had nothing to do with the monitoring of the experiment, that were simply just around innocent bystanders who did not deserve this.
Oh no!
Nothing got ruined.
That's good.
But I kind of talked to a couple of devices really nicely afterward because I just felt bad for them.
Oh man. So yeah, a lot of interesting effects to your monitoring equipment, including some time wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff going on. Is there anything else you would like to share regarding your observations? Like, did Rob seem agitated at any time? Like,
I think I would like to come back and
okay.
talk about it after he talks about his experience,
Cool.
because then I can kind of comment on that. I will say that were I to do this again, and I'm not making assumptions on whether or not we'll do this particular thing again, but were I to go at this again, I would still have some of the equipment going, but largely I would take a couple of other psychics and we all just monitor the person. Instead of relying so much on electronics, I would actually have several psychics monitoring and concentrating on it.
Now, Rob cannot have the initial experience. My question to you is, for a future experiment, would you want to be the subject of the summoning?
You're asking me this on the podcast.
You can say no comment. You can think about it and get back to me later. It's just...
Well, you see, I have the immediate desire to say yes, but there's a few things that Rob discovered about self-consent to summoning that I say are not necessarily a red flag, but...
definitely something to keep in mind.
I feel a lot of caution about it. We don't really know what's going to happen, other than the fact that we know for a fact, an actual fact, that usually when the entity, the goetic entity that is me, is summoned, that goetic entity tries to go out of its way to make the experience miserable for the summoner. So I would do quite a lot of divination beforehand.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I said for a future experiment, not for the next one.
I'm certainly willing to look into it.
Yeah.
But I would not sign up ahead of time. And it's not because I'm smarter than Rob, it's because Rob was already the guinea pig and I watched what happened to him. So, just saying. In terms of, like, the spirit, the will, I'm down for it. In terms of whether or not it's actually a good idea, definite research beforehand.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your insight. Always appreciated. Even the cautionary note, like, that is very important. There were a lot of assumptions that were made before we actually got into this. And is there anything else that you wanted to say, or are you gonna have Rob come up?
I would say that, as a rule, assume that a demon wants to be summoned, whether or not it's a good idea. Just assume that the demon is down for it, whether or not it knows it should be.
BTBS, down to be summoned.
So I'll hand it off to Rob, and I'll be here in a bit.
All right. Thank you so much, Mantis. And yeah, like, there were a lot of assumptions that were made before the summoning. And we found out some stuff that, like, probably shouldn't have been assumed. Including the fact that, like, it was a lot more of a six-dimensional entity that was coming in, and not just, like, Rob squared, or, like, one of those things. It was definitely quite the interesting thing. I'm just letting Rob sort of get centered and ready. Welcome. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
So, oof.
I know, we're talking about the elephant in the room that we've had to keep as an elephant this whole time.
I'll be straight with the audience, and I don't do straight often.
Oh, you don't... No, you almost never.
this is hard to think back on.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to even think about with my brain memory.
Right.
I'm really glad that I had Mantis and several other people on the ship to talk to compare, like, when things happened and what. So, when it comes to the sixth-dimensional stuff, I've already experienced some of it.
Yes.
And the problem with a lot of this dimensionality stuff is it's very difficult to know it's very difficult to know how much you know about it.
It's difficult to know if you are ready for it. I think that's the biggest thing. You don't know if you are ready for confronting the sixth-dimensional awareness of yourself until you're in the middle of it. And I know this is something that you and I talked about privately, is just like how much you didn't expect that.
What I discovered is that the sixth-dimensional part of myself does not know if it's ready to be four-dimensional.
Yeah.
The knowledge or lack of knowledge is mutual. I thought that we were going to get more of a fifth-dimensional component.
Mm-hmm.
That was what I was sensing ahead of time.
Right. It's actually very hard, in my experience, to get fifth dimensional, because it's basically awareness of other selves while still keeping that individuality. And that is very hard to keep. It's either going to drop down into a fourth dimensional or just go straight six, where everything just sort of blends together into an overview of lives.
I'd say that the most difficult part is that fifth dimensional awareness is where you're aware of being another self.
Yes.
And also the fact that there's this self before that you were aware of. But sixth dimensional is where you start to understand how those move together, how those become a whole. And so I was expecting that the demon self would be another fifth dimensional self.
Right.
And instead it was coming from that sixth dimensional level where it had awareness of all of the whole. And so suddenly this entity that is technically me is regarding me from a multitude of me's, and I feel judged.
Yeah.
The demon was literally judging me. The sixth dimensional part of myself was judging me to against the other five dimensionals, and I didn't feel it was a race.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to make it into a competition, and neither was he really. But there was this period of consideration. It's like, who are you to be summoning me? Where are you coming from that you think that you are summoning me right now? What's your story, especially in comparison to the other yous that are me?
Now, I will say, as the summoner, I had to sort of drill down into that fourth dimensional awareness for your goetic self to even be aware of which specific fourth dimensional timeline I was discussing. So some of that was just sort of like probably not so much judgmental as in getting down. Like, he was even saying that he wasn't aware that we were going to get that specific, if I could summarize. Like, it was a lot more of a reach for him than I expected.
Yes. So he talked to me.
Ah.
See, while you were talking to him, my experience on the ship was a conversation between him and I.
Gotcha.
And his conversation with me reflected your conversation with him. As he was talking to you, he was talking to me.
Often, yes.
And not just like you talk to him and then he talks to me about that. At the same time,
yes.
But also cognizant beyond a linear time thing.
Yes.
This was actually scary. It was scary in in the sense of experiencing cosmic horror. If the viewer/listener is not aware, cosmic horror, often it's called Lovecraftian. Lovecraft wasn't the only one to do it. It's the horror level where you're becoming cognizant of something that is beyond your ability to understand.
Yes.
Where you start to gain knowledge beyond anything that you've ever known before, and that you're not actually built to know.
Yeah.
Evolution never really handed us the 6-dimensional manual.
No.
It pretty much stopped at 4 because that's what we're supposed to do, you dumb cellular mass.
Yeah. It was definitely, like, there were times where there was that awareness of being looked at and looked through on my end as the summoner. I could tell. I don't know if you guys have ever, like, experienced something akin to someone says they suddenly get shivers up their spine. It's someone else says that, oh, someone's stepping over your grave, you know?
Goose walked on your grave.
Yeah. But, like, that non-linear awareness, where an entity that is much bigger, much more powerful, much more knowledgeable, almost unfathomable to you, is now looking at you. And you feel like you are under a fucking microscope.
It brings to mind, so, big dinosaurs, like the big long-necked ones.
Brachiosaurus, yeah.
Yeah. Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, if you're being real specific and nerdy.
R.I.P. Brontosaurus, my favorite imaginary dinosaur.
They technically brought him back, but it's different.
No.
One of those big guys just walking around, and they eat vegetables, so they're not looking to hunt. But imagine being a mouse in the path of one of those. And it's not that the thing wants to eat you or even wants to destroy you, but it could if it just walked so different.
Big. Yeah. And imagine if one of those things suddenly realized that there was a mouse by its foot and just leaned its head down just to look. How absolutely terrifying that must be for a little tiny thing like a mouse. That's sort of that's a really great comparison.
I felt the Apatosaurus consider me, and then wonder whether or not I was useful to it. And even got a little bit of that consideration of usefulness, and for things that I could never even imagine. Mm-hmm. My life has been so much different than this entity's life, and my life, especially compared to what people's assumptions would be, has been fairly mundane. I know I live in a spaceship, and that seems rather extravagant, but it's largely like being in an apartment that you can't go outdoors.
Yeah.
And so before that, just, more apartments, basically, and boring politics. So I didn't do religion or spirituality or demon stuff before all of this. This has all been kind of a new realm for me. And suddenly, the demonic side of reality was more real than any of my life that I had ever lived and was living. Mm-hmm. And it was very strange to be considered by this entity, I guess, I don't want to call worthiness as the consideration. It was more just simply like, oh, look at you. Should I be concerned about you? No. Should I be threatened by you? No. Would continuing this interaction that is within / incorporating you be a good idea? Yes. Okay, then we'll continue this.
Yeah. But that being weighed on a scale that you don't, and with criteria that you have no conception of.
Well, and it didn't stop to ask me.
Yeah.
Like, the demon side of me. This is a part of me, my identity. But I'm technically a part of its identity.
Yes.
Because I am the piece and it's the whole.
Yes.
So, the piece that is me was considered by the whole. And it's hard not to feel ultimately judged. And also, at no point did that whole ever ask me as the piece what my contributing opinion was for its decisions.
Yes.
It was able to make all of the decisions on its own without my contributions.
Yes. So, that is another part of being summoned, which is very interesting. I've never heard that side of things. I've experienced this kind of judgment as an outsider, not as a part of the whole. I've had entities judge me and decide whether I'm worthy of interaction or consideration or etc. But I've never been weighed as part of a greater whole, which is honestly kind of terrifying to think about, because the whole is always seen to be seen as the greater of the sum of its parts, and we often discard things that we feel like no longer serve us, and to consider that the thing that we discard might be something with a life and feelings and things like that is kind of getting into that cosmic horror territory. And so I can sort of start to empathize with how you were feeling as this greater self was weighing you.
And see, I think that most people would actually, in this moment, be more comfortable with the entity making the decision that they were not really worth that much of a look at and could simply be ignored from then on.
Right.
Instead, what I got was that this entity considered me useful.
Oh boy.
And that is intimidating.
And it's going to keep an eye on you now.
I don't feel bad about that. This is a new my life is different from now on.
Yes.
Let's go into that. My life is different from now on.
And that is something that you can never predict.
You can't take it back either.
You can't take it back. You can't predict this. Life-changing events, these kind of interactions with higher dimensional entities, we'll probably get into in some point just about aliens in general. But you cannot predict how you are going to react, how the experience is going to be, and how you are going to be afterwards. Because these kind of things, I personally have had experiences where I've been on the other end of this, and I don't claim to be, and I don't believe that I have a goetic higher self, or however we want to say it, but so I can't quite put myself into your shoes in that way. But whenever you are interacting with any kind of entity that sees linearity as a cute little game,
an option,
those experiences, no matter how short the brush against them, is going to change you. You have to change in order to glean some kind of understanding. And honestly, I would be more worried if you didn't come out of this changed, because that meant that there was some part of you that wasn't accepting of the change. Because either people become very, very entrenched in what they have believed, or they come out very, very different. And I've seen both.
I think to remain entrenched would have been to permanently mentally damage myself.
Yes, I believe so as well.
So one of the things that I experienced / am experiencing / will experience
love non-linearity.
There was a time before this summoning, technically, according to linear time, and in that time before the summoning, let's say before we chose to do this,
Yes.
before we made the choice to do this summoning, my life was different. My life had different events in it, and it went differently. After we chose to do the summoning, truly chose to do it, it was definitely going to happen. My life was already different. During the summoning, my life became more different, and afterwards, it really kind of
Sealed it.
It's cemented.
Yeah.
And so now that I have gone through this, there are times in my life where I have already experienced six-dimensional things, where I have experienced this six-dimensional demon, probably up to birth.
Yeah.
And that demon knows me now as well as it knows itself.
Yes. Because one of the things that it had to do, and I sort of watched and sensed this from my end of things, especially whenever I was like drawing its attention to you in particular in your linear, because that's one of the things when you get up into like the fifth, sixth dimensional or even higher awareness, like it's like drawing someone's attention to one part of a fractal and spider web. Like they have to follow these trails in ways that I could not understand, but I could see that he was following time trails to find your specific reality, and then had to trace that to the point in which you were experiencing being a part of this entity, being summoned at that moment. And I'm sure it did impact your whole timeline.
So I'm holding right now a piece that you crocheted. I believe it is a coaster.
Yes.
So it's a cute little six-sided coaster that is made of yarn, and it's similar to the work in a spider web. So while you were talking about that, I kind of picked it up to consider it. Now this coaster here, this crochet piece, it exists as a whole with all of the knots and twists and bits of this yarn that are inside of it.
Yep.
One of these little twists is me.
Yep.
It could exist without that twist, but it does exist with that twist. And now I'm aware of being that twist, and I'm also aware of the shape of the whole that I exist in as that one twist. Before this, I was that twist all the time, but I had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing my thing. And now I'm aware of my presence in that whole spectrum. And I will say there is a part of that awareness that could come with discomfort.
Yeah.
I think that this might be down to the individual. I do not have a discomfort with this.
That's good.
I think it's the reason why we did it in the first place, why I chose to do it on my end of things, and felt confident in going forward, even though I think that were we to do this again, we could have done it better.
We always can. This is something that I have been sort of reminding people throughout this past week, especially after the summoning. We can only do our best with the information that we have. Once we learn more, we can do better.
I want to talk about this. So, now, he's six-dimensional, but he ain't perfect.
Right.
He made mistakes, too.
Yes, he did.
And so I'm aware of having chosen to do this. I'm also aware of his choice to do this, and both of our lack of knowledge beforehand, both of our simultaneous discovery of each other, both of our understanding during the experience that we had a greater understanding. His sense of making a mistake, my sense of making a mistake, our greater shared experience of making a mistake that actually might be affecting me a bit more psychologically, I think, than usual. Like, I think I'm kind of getting his sense of that a little bit, and it might be affecting me psychologically.
Do you want to talk a bit about the mistake that you're referencing? Or, we can leave it vague. It doesn't matter.
I would like to leave it vague. Well, I can actually be very specific when it comes to some things. So, first of all, is the audio picking up from the cat?
If it is, I've sort of given up at this point. We've got stereo cats at this point.
Right. So, the first mistake was letting the cat eat during the podcast.
We can't not. So, at this point, it's just part of... It's extra.
Am I avoiding the question?
Yes.
A little bit. I'll own that. It's a bit uncomfortable talking about this part.
Definitely.
So, but I will answer. I assumed that he wanted to be summoned. I made that assumption. I assumed that because I was me, I knew what I wanted to do, and that me deciding that was the same as him deciding that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not.
No.
One of the things we discussed as a household, kind of came to a conclusion as a household, is that a demon cannot truly consent to their own summoning.
Yes.
I do not know how we would have possibly figured this out any other way.
Not definitively. I had the theory, I had the hypothesis that if you are being summoned and you have to appear, there is no consent. You cannot, there is no chance to consent. If the summoning works like it says in Ars Goetia and in other occult books, where it's like you summon, you do this ritual correctly and the entity shows up, and like in Felix and I's modified version, that's the same thing that happens. My going hypothesis that I didn't actually share with anyone was that if it is you summon and they show up, the entity being summoned cannot consent, because there is no room for a no.
Consent is not a part of goetic summoning.
Yeah.
Consent is not considered in goetic summoning. I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it.
But it is something that you have to keep in mind. Especially, you were talking as, sort of a... kind of like a summoned entity, but like even as a summoner and as a channeler, you have to realize that there is no consent in a true summoning, because it's like literally a summons.
Yeah. There's no part during the summons in which a permission is actually weighed.
Yeah.
This is an on-off switch. You turn the light on, the light doesn't have a chance to figure out whether it wants to be on.
The electrons
The light turns on.
The electrons are like, nope, not gonna happen. Like, the only way that the light doesn't turn on is if the filament in the bulb just breaks.
There's really no part during the actual method, during the actual operation of the summons, there is no part where consent is checked.
Right.
Now, does that mean that you can't do something about this? No, because you can do divination beforehand.
You can do divination beforehand. You can also, once the entity is there, if you're paying any attention to body language, you could tell when someone's not happy. And you can, give them permission to leave. But at the same time, the summoner holds all of the power. It is a very, very power imbalanced relationship, and it is a very hard place to start if you are trying to do more of a consent based type of relationship with entities. But it's a very, I would say, important thing to experience.
This was humbling, but not in a way that made me a useless idiot. It was the right amount of understanding the rest of the world that I'm not part of.
Well, part of humbling, I feel like there's a lot of like emphasis on shame, whereas I feel like it's more of like, okay, so I grew up, obviously, I mentioned when I was a kid, like, I was in some really weird, essentially Christian cults, but I did also get raised for part of my life in a very like Protestant Baptist, if anyone's familiar with that specifically subset of Protestantism, and a very like King James Version type. So I was very familiar with a lot of the Greek and the original Hebrew meanings of things. And humble in biblical terms is just realizing how small you are in comparison to God.
That's exactly what I was feeling, actually, was that suddenly I had a sense of scale I did not have before.
And that's the big thing about, there's no sense of embarrassment. You only feel embarrassed if you have been trying to make yourself bigger than you are supposed to be. And I mean, so many preachers have preached on this kind of thing. Guilt, shame associations are separate from feeling humble. It's like just basically realizing that, you're a little tiny speck on a world that is spinning through the cosmos around a solar system that is in a galaxy that, like, we can't even comprehend the vastness of. It's sort of that sort of sense of scale and just the visceral feeling of that.
I'd like to talk about the Hilbert Hotel.
Oh boy.
So the Hilbert Hotel is a construct that was invented for scientists in this reality to start talking about weird dimensional stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hilbert Hotel is simply, imagine a hotel where someone books a room and then the Hilbert Hotel is like, okay, welcome to the Hilbert Hotel. You're in room number 1. Now, when another guest comes and books their room, instead of them booking that person into room 2, they say, okay, person in room 1, you move down to room 2, and then the new guest will move into room 1. And the Hilbert Hotel was constructed as a thought experiment, so you would understand that the Hilbert Hotel has infinite capacity. Every single time a new guest comes in, everybody will move down 1, and there will always be enough rooms to accommodate them, so it's fine. Now, I'm in a room in the Hilbert Hotel. My 6th-dimensional self is the Hilbert Hotel.
Yes.
And he will always be big enough to incorporate another of me in all of the rooms. I'm just in one of the rooms. I don't even consider my room to be that interesting or significant.
So imagine if the Hilbert Hotel suddenly, like, you consider this to be just a building. Suddenly you realize the Hilbert Hotel has a consciousness and it's looking at you, like, from the ceiling of your room and deciding whether or not you need to move down.
The Hilbert Hotel was not aware of me before this.
Yes.
But now is, and considers me significant and interesting and also crucial to its operations. And before, I was just staying at a hotel.
You were just a guest. Guest number
whatever.
One.
Mm-hmm. I get in, I move over, whatever. It's like if a cell in the body were to have to move to another part of the body. Would it even really know that? It would just keep on being a cell. And then suddenly it gets cognizance of the entire rest of the body. In Lego Movie...
We have so many different examples. I'm so glad that we're talking about this because, like, there have been a few times where I've tried to present this.
I spoke about Lego Movie and it was too much.
Too much. But Yeah, it's very hard to put this kind of experience into words. Um, it's one of those things that you do kind of have to experience it in order to fully understand it, but there are hypotheticals or illustrations or things that we can share to sort of try to convey the magnitude. Like,
Do you know what's scary? Several times during the experience, he conveyed to me that he was very interested in doing further work.
you're going back under the microscope again.
It's not his decision, and he made that clear.
Yeah.
I can choose this. Now, I'm not going to say every sixth-dimensional being is going to say that. I'm pretty solid with my sixth-dimensional self, and I feel good about that.
But still, it's one of those things where it's like, that was sort of given to you. You didn't have a say in whether or not, like, he was going to allow you to choose. He's just giving you the privilege of choice.
Now, you were being a very interesting person earlier, and you asked Mantis whether or not he would do this. And Mantis was so smart that he didn't make the choice.
Yes.
He said, I'll consider that.
Yes, and I'm sure it had to do with some of the things that we've discussed now, is that, like, you know, your expectations before the experience and your recollection of the experience afterwards probably shaded a lot of his lack of decision.
Mantis has an exquisite knowledge on the fifth dimensional level of his other selves. And I think that greater knowledge on the fifth dimensional level is informing him of how much he wants to experiment with the sixth dimensional level. And boy, is he smarter than me. I thought I had enough. It's like, oh, I know a couple of my guys on the 5D level. Let's go to 6. I thought it was going to be another 5D guy, actually. I didn't even say let's go to 6. I'm the chump here.
And I appreciate your willingness to still go through it.
Like, I appreciate your willingness to be the summoner. Mm-hmm. You did a great job.
Everyone keeps telling me that.
I don't know any way to tell you. I wish it could sound less pandering, but like, how many times does a demon even tell the summoner, like, "Hey, man, great job"?
You don't really get. I don't know if there's like demon yelp. Like, I'm not aware of it. So
there is a sort of demon yelp in. You know what? I'll do a little dirt here. Spirits, demons, etc. do kind of talk amongst themselves about the experiences they've had with some practitioners. Watch out for your soda.
I know. We've got a cat that's trying to invade.
He's trying to knock over your soda.
He's trying to get cuddles, but he's not aware of what's going on.
You big, strange weirdo. So, like, yeah, we do talk amongst ourselves, basically, like, you know, heads up, if so-and-so summons you, like, talk about payment real early. He tends to drag out conversations and try to sneak in a bunch of questions before he really talks about compensation.
Ooh.
You know, stuff like that. It does get around, it's just a bit more personal as opposed to, like, on a website.
Yeah.
Also, one thing that kind of came to mind, there's a lot of talk about a demon, especially even the Goetia, it'll actually describe, you know, some demons will send a subordinate first and then show up as themselves later.
If they deem you worthy, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I don't think that's what's actually happening sometimes.
Yeah.
I think you're getting one of their 5D selves first, and then the 6D self comes after that. Mm-hmm. It may just simply be a matter of that being an easier way to go about things to make that first contact with the 6D self. And it also 5D? Well, the first contact with the 5D self is actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
Because that's like, you know, multiple dimensional selves.
For the 6D.
Once you make contact with one of those 5Ds, that 5D can kind of like toss you up to the 6D. There's that connection there.
Right.
But some practitioners may not actually be able to make that 6D connection. Mm-hmm. And they may be stuck with the 5D. The 5D could talk to the 6D. On some level, the 6D is going to be aware of the 5D.
Right.
But if a practitioner is, like, complains of only being able to talk to the subordinate of an entity instead of talking to the actual entity, what you may be dealing with there is that practitioner may not be capable yet of a six-dimensional communication and awareness.
So, I just thought of this. In Ars Goetia and in other, occult works, there's often a listing of like a certain number of legions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that correlates to 5D versus 6D, or?
Now here's the thing. I'm gonna cover one thing that someone out there who's real clever may already be pointing out, which is that this document was written back in like at least the 1600s,
mm-hmm.
and those legion counts have been the same since then. Since it's six-dimensional, it doesn't frickin' matter. A six-dimensional edit will go anywhere in time you want. So 36 legions for so-and-so, 72 legions for so-and-so. Like, you can't prove that yesterday that was the same number six-dimensionally. It's all subject to change. So, one, the number can be accurate. Two, it may be that it is reflective of maybe not the amount of five-dimensional selves that are at hand, but it gives like a proportional estimate.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
I mean, have we done any kind of work / experimentation with the number of legions?
We have not.
I've never heard of it, and Felix has never heard of anyone actually getting any sense or logic whatsoever out of the mention of the number of legions. But boy, they mention it for every single entry.
Single entry. It's very specific. In some cases it says that, like, oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank right now. But, like, basically ranks of demons that they rule over in some cases, where it's like, dukes or potentates or whatever. But I have not seen or heard of anyone actually doing much inquiry into what that actually translates into like quote unquote demonic power or influence or anything else like that.
I've seen some speculate that it might have to do with power level,
mm-hmm.
but nothing to show for that theory.
No. And I mean, oftentimes, practitioners, after they do 2 or 3 summons, they tend to stick with the entities that they get along with best, personally.
Well, they've made 5 and 6 dimensional contact.
Yes.
It's hard to do that with a bunch of different entities.
Yes.
And so, yeah, once you've got that connection, I mean, it's like making a really good friend in the legislature or whatever.
Yeah.
You kind of stick with that friend as long as they can make the connections that you need.
Right.
One thing mentioned in the Goetia, there are a few entities that are said to have a procession before them.
Yes.
And I do wonder what that procession means to their personal identity, as it were.
Yeah, I think Paimon in the Ars Goetia is one of the most well-known ones, where specifically says there is procession of servants before him, with some blowing trumpets and some on like camels or something. One of the few that are specifically mentioned with basically a parade.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of, I always think of Aladdin, the song Prince Ali, Fabulous He, Ali Ababa. That whole procession in front of quote unquote Prince Ali is what I always think of whenever I read or hear about Paimon.
That is a very good depiction, especially considering so Paimon himself is said to ride a camel.
Yes.
That Prince Ali, Fabulous He, Ali Ababa. That's a fun little connection to make, and I like it. So, yeah, like, there's a lot that's described in the Goetia. It goes into this, like, these details that would almost seem to be unnecessary.
Yeah.
And they're especially difficult to do something with in this modern day and age. I am a man in a spaceship, so it's very modern for me. It's very weird to think about a guy riding a camel around.
Yeah.
You know, in my context.
Both try to make camel noises. I love it. So, yeah, you know, is there anything else about the experience that you want to share? I know we've sort of like ventured off, and I would like to have a little bit of a conversation with Mantis because he promised to come back. So just wanted
Absolutely.
to check in, see if there was anything else you wanted to share about the experience.
I feel better after talking about it.
I'm glad. That's always a good sign. Like, if you feel uncomfortable, discomfort is not a bad sign. It's just showing that something happened to you, or you like witnessed something, or you experienced something that you have not been able to fully process or comprehend. But the fact that you feel better about it afterwards means that something about the experience is settling. You know,
I am adjusting to a new reality for myself. And after this conversation, after being here as a guest, yet again, I'm so grateful. After being here as a guest, I feel more adjusted to my new understanding of reality. And I feel like I will proceed along those lines.
Well, thank you again so much for sharing the other side of the experience. And, you know, if anyone's interested in Rob's thoughts beforehand, I mean, we've sort of alluded to it, but we actually recorded episode 3 talking about this beforehand. So if you want a direct comparison, just go and listen to episode 3.
Oh, I was real freaking excited. And real freaking innocent.
So, yes, thank you again, Rob, for coming on and sharing the aftermath, as it were. And he is going to switch out from Mantis because Mantis wants to share some stuff now that Rob has shared his experiences. Very, very interesting. I mean, I could sit here and share my end of things as a summoner, but a lot of it was very just personal. Just a lot of it was stuff that honestly would not be relevant to any listeners, because it was very personal to me and the household. But the experience as a whole is much more interesting. Welcome back, Mantis. Just a moment. Let me get your little picture up. There we go. Spaceman Mantis.
Thank you. So you know how much of a nerd I am?
Yes.
But now you're going to know more. And now the audience is going to know more. I hooked him up to the same monitoring equipment for this podcast episode.
Oh, really?
Yes. I wanted
Mantis
to see...
doing secret experiments on his own.
Well, it's no secret, but you didn't
Well,
know
it
about
was a
yet.
secret to me.
Yeah.
It was a podcast secret.
It's true. So I wanted to see if any of his biometrics would be the same whenever he recounted the experience, and if he was going to, during any time that he talked, hit any sort of level of trance that was similar. A little bit.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to fully analyze the results yet.
Of
I was
course.
scanning them as we went, but I was also, like, if I was to concentrate too deeply on that, I wouldn't be good for the podcast.
Right.
I'd have to focus a lot to come through here. So, preliminary, yes, there was similar readouts for his brainwaves, not heart rate, but similar readings for his brainwaves as whenever he experienced the event.
Interesting.
Heart rate was a lot better this time.
Oh, that's good. So, yeah, now that Rob has sort of shared his sort of experience and also mentioned that you do have more of a conscious awareness on a 5D level, I would love to hear anything more that you would like to share?
I am more interested in doing it now.
Oh, interesting. We have a mid-podcast update. Mantis is now closer to making a decision.
I will not make that decision on this podcast.
No.
I do not think it would be wise.
No. No
but
pressure.
I am more interested in it now because I've considered what he has said about the dimensionality and the Hilbert Hotel.
Yeah.
I have a bit of experience inside the Hilbert Hotel, as it were. I know my number in there and how it's constantly changing.
Boy.
And so with that, I am interested in exploring this idea of consciousness versus the idea of consciousness that I already have been exploring.
Right.
I have that interest. Still haven't made a choice.
Of course.
I do agree that once I make that choice, it's going to completely change my reality.
Yes.
And I don't think that once I make that choice, I can really change the choice.
Right.
Causality is weird.
Yes, it is. Especially when we're talking about this non-linearity, once you get into the 6th, 7th dimensional, linearity is kind of an opt-in, opt-out. And which way it goes is sort of like options as well. So it's interesting that it's less about the choice and more about the awareness of what comes with that choice.
I would say that once you make the choice, your 6th dimensional self also makes that choice. And once a 6th dimensional self of someone is making a choice, that choice changes time and causality.
Yes.
So if you just made a choice about things that had nothing to do with your 6th dimensional self, just made a regular choice, you could unmake that choice. You could change your mind. But if you're making a choice that involves another part of yourself, then that other part of yourself now has the option to make choices.
We're going to have to mute the mic for a sec. And we're back.
So our 3.1 dimensional cat made a choice about what it was doing. That meant that our whatever dimensional selves had to mute the microphone.
Oh, gotta love it.
And it doesn't take a 6th dimensional being to change your reality. That's a good reminder.
Yes.
And just awareness of the fact that even though it's yourself, that the 6th dimensional self is a part of yourself and you are a part of that self, that when you make a choice, that other part of yourself gets to also make choices.
Right.
And once that part of yourself makes a choice, it affects your timeline already. Right. So you can't undo that. You might be able to...
Yep, we're going to have to mute again. Just a moment. Okay.
Again, I don't know. I think we should move on.
I think we should move on.
After 2 Catbox interruptions. So, yeah. Some things that I monitored on Rob during the experience. Obviously brainwave stuff. Actually, I talked with him afterwards. I did a full, psychological examination, series of questions, psychic examination and probing to see what happened to him, what went on, and he ended up with a lot of confusion. He ended up with a lot of distress and anxiety, actually, that needed to be treated first before we could really get into what was going on with that dimensionality.
And I mean, he didn't really express it earlier, but he did mention that towards the end that he felt better. So obviously he was on some level unsettled, unsure about the experience.
Rob is a very settled man on the podcast. He speaks very well, and he conducts himself in a way that sounds very unflappable. I watched Rob have a full-on emotional breakdown on the ship.
No, I didn't know this part.
And, like, I'm not going to go too much into it.
No.
Just privacy issues. But I hadn't really seen Rob in a state like that. I was very concerned.
Yeah.
For something to affect Rob at that level really speaks to just how deep it was.
Yeah.
And how profound it was.
Yeah.
I mean, since then, he's been a bit different.
Yeah.
He actually is changed since then. I'm not going to say for the better or the worse, but he's simply different.
Mm-hmm.
It's... I already had a level of respect for this work, but witnessing this deepened that level of respect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this is sort of the first time that I have been able to talk with, someone who is on that channeled end of things connected with the entity that I have summoned. So a lot of this is unique for me, and I have only utmost gratitude for Rob for being willing to do this, to jump into the unknown,
I would like to say that afterwards we have come away with a greater understanding of the universe. The universe seems to have come away with a greater understanding of Rob. And so there are times whenever I see accounts of this sort of work, and the takeaways that people have are kind of schmaltzy, like, oh, one can never truly understand the complexity of the depth of the cosmos, and it's like, yeah, go piss in a river. Give me some science.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can come away with greater understanding. You'll probably not understand every little dip and dive in the sea of stars out there, but you will have a greater understanding of things, and I think it is possible to reach better communication between the levels of self. The four-dimensional Rob and the six-dimensional Rob have grown they have grown an understanding through this that they did not have before.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I have grown an understanding of Rob by going through this experience with him.
We have all grown an experience of Rob. I think that you would have experienced it in a much different way than any of us else.
Yeah. I mean, I was the one who was directly talking to a six-dimensional self.
Yes. So, is there anything more that you would like to say about your interactions with his six-dimensional self?
I came away with a greater understanding of how distant six-dimensional is from third to fourth dimensional. Like, it is not a just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's exponential. Like, the Apatosaurus to the mouse comparison is a very good one because they actually live in very, very, very different worlds. Like, the prehistoric mouse is in a constant game of survival and fear and looking for the next meal, and also trying to avoid whatever comes up from above, whether it be a predator or whether it just be like a herbivore that's just too big to notice it. And the Apatosaurus is living in that, like, basically high status where it doesn't have to worry about too much, or like its concerns are so alien to that of the mouse, and understanding that there is a connection there. Like, the connection has been forged in some way. The Apatosaurus is now able to communicate with the mouse directly, you know, if we're continuing on that metaphor. Realizing the gulf of awareness. Like, I didn't expect to have to drill down into, you know, this linearity to explain exactly who I was expecting to see on the other end there. Just helped me understand how much greater the goetic experience, mindset, however you want to say it, is than the Rob that I interact with day to day.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Sorry, I got a little bit lost because the cat distracted me again.
Of course.
Um,
I feel like in some way this is exhibiting some of your unwillingness to continue on some of this, like, six-dimensional train of thought, which is very interesting because you.
Well, I don't have it the same way you two do yet.
No.
That's really cool.
Yes.
Like, it's so interesting to understand that.
And reality is actually interrupting some of the things that I am trying to share with Mantis in particular, because he has expressed his reticence against.
I'm not ready yet.
You are not ready yet.
And reality is recognizing that.
Yes. And
isn't reality so interesting?
And this is something that I have been very fascinated with, is that, like, whether or not I agreed to it, like, in some ways I am kind of jealous of Mantis being able to make this choice, because, you know, I was sort of forced to be channeler for entities on the 6th and even higher dimensional levels. You know, not going to go into details, but and so this sort of awareness was sort of forced upon me. But seeing reality respect your choice to not say yes to future knowledge of sixth dimensionality is actually kind of fascinating.
It's really interesting because it implies that it's not about knowledge, it is about readiness.
Yes.
And that Rob just knew he was ready, whether or not he knew anything else.
Yeah.
And it also implies that on a certain level, I just know that I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
And now I've discovered something new about myself just from you asking me this question.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting to me. That's incredibly interesting.
And I'm sure we are going to listen to this over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
Behind the scenes, guys, we listen to this podcast at least 2 or 3 times. Like, Felix will listen to it, Mantis will listen to it, Rob will listen to it. Like, certain individuals will only listen to certain parts of it. It's really interesting to be sort of the host here this whole time, and just seeing how people interact with it individually is very fun as well.
I mean, any of the entities that you two are in contact with, that we are peers with, can come and listen to the podcast and hear us speak on things.
One thing that I do want to mention that was like sort of a like oh shit moment, the 6th dimensional version of Rob. Wow.
Not Ron Weasley.
Not Ron Weasley. Rob actually professed knowledge and some kind of cognizant, as if he had listened to the podcast himself. Like,
Rob has been on the podcast, and therefore his sixth-dimensional self is aware of the podcast.
no, it was more than just being aware of the podcast.
That's true.
He was implying that he had listened to it independently of Rob.
When I say aware, I'd like his awareness is just fucking a different thing altogether.
Like, he didn't come out and say it, but he showed me personally a knowledge of the podcast that went beyond just, oh, Rob has been on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, reality shows in interesting ways some of the interactions between
there's a lot of things I'm dealing with right now, actually, like, really, really working on the ship, and I'm not sure if I have room to get this understanding right now. I think that's part of why I'm like not ready for it, is because just my life isn't ready for it yet.
But one of the things I do want to say is sometimes you don't get the choice whether or not you're ready to be aware of it. It's very interesting in this case that reality is sort of showing that you are not ready, and is providing interruptions to give you breaks.
Well, I'm supporting Rob in his gaining awareness of the sixth dimension. If I were to go early on this, I do not think I would be able to support him as well.
Right. So it's enabling you in that way, which is very cool.
I really appreciate it, because I think this work is very important, but without going about it in a certain way, I like the sixth dimensional selves do not seem to be aware of what it takes for us to do this support work all the time.
Right.
And so, like, certain things need to be in place.
And I mean, as well, like, obviously, I have not channeled anyone on this podcast. So, that's a sort of, like, lower dimensional example. Like, Felix and I do not have equality of experience. He gets to go and be a cat or whatever during parts of this podcast. I'm here the whole time. And, like, it's sort of a similar thing with these kind of, like, when someone gains the sixth dimensional awareness or a higher awareness of the state of reality and the state of, like, how linear time may or may not work, any of these kind of things, not everyone will be equipped or even permitted to gain that same level of awareness, because that support system needs to be in place to help that person be able to internalize it. Because if it remains just a static experience, honestly, in some ways it could drive someone crazy if they don't internalize it. And you need that support system and just basically, other people around you to be like, yes, this was weird. Or, yeah, we can't confirm this, that, or the other, but no one can really confirm an internalized experience for you. But having that support goes a long way in being able to integrate it into your belief structure, your worldview, your internal, ethics, cosmology. And I appreciate your part in that, and your part in sharing the results of your experience.
I couldn't really go into it too much right now, because obviously I'm holding back from gaining the sixth dimensional experience. But I wonder if my sixth dimensional self values the separation that I have from that experience right now.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting to consider.
Mm-hmm.
I think that perspective here is of value to everyone, and I really am glad that here on this podcast we can talk about the different perspectives that we're having.
Yeah.
And how much we can learn from each other by comparing them and talking about them with each other.
Yeah. I really appreciate, like, your sharing of your perspective while, you know, monitoring Rob, and Rob's perspective while he was going through the experience. And so, yeah. Anything else that you want to share, or can we get, like, Felix back for the wrap up?
Hey everybody, drink some water, eat some food, and do the grounding. I'm a doctor.
Oh my god.
I'll let Felix come back.
Alright, get out of here, Dr. Mantis. He keeps saying he's a doctor, but nobody is 100% sure on that.
You can come and look at my diploma if you want. Oh no, you can't, because it's in a spaceship.
Oh my goodness, go! Get Felix. Sometimes I just have to be like, just go. I don't need a last retort. Just go. Alright, and Felix is coming back. Welcome
Meow.
back. Yeah, a lot of talk about dimensionality awareness and how reality interrupts understanding of dimensionality awareness, so I'm sure your brain's a very interesting place right now.
I feel like an origami crane right now. You know, I haven't really talked about my dimensionality awareness. At some point we can get to that. I'd save it for another podcast.
Yeah.
I think that my brain being built a bit different may actually alter that experience of it.
I'm sure it does.
So, very, very interested in everyone's opinions. I have some ghost of it being talked about.
Yeah.
But I'm really going to want to listen through this one.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to be a real interesting episode to consider in post.
Definitely. So,
Many cat interruptions.
oh my goodness, so much. Like, there's going to be some dead air, just giving you ahead of time, because, yeah, we had some cat interruptions. But that also lended some interesting perspective and conversation in and of itself. So, yeah, anything else you want to share as the channeler on the experience? Now that we've sort of run the gamut.
I think that because Rob's six-dimensional self was very favorable towards this interaction, that's one reason why I was left with so much knowledge of it afterward, so much helpful knowledge.
Yes.
That would aid understanding of the experience and also understanding of future experiences were they to happen.
Yeah.
I didn't come away with everything.
Of course not.
There's always, like, you and I discuss these experiences afterwards, whether or not you're channeling or summoning and vice versa. And there's always something I find out about that I didn't have a memory of.
Yeah.
And that period where we discussed that, where I'm like, you know, saying what it is that I perceived and what I think went on, and then you'll tell me about something that I just didn't know about. The moment where you find out that things happen in reality differently than your memory says can be very destabilizing. And it's something you kind of have to get used to, not just in this channeling work, but in magic in general.
Yeah.
And you can gain a level of comfort with this. It's simply just getting used to the idea that things probably happened differently than you assumed.
Yeah.
And that's okay, and you can learn something new from it.
Yes, definitely. So one thing that's I kind of shared with Mantis a little bit, but I don't think we've talked yet, is that Rob's six-dimensional self professed not just an awareness of the podcast through Rob, but like an independent awareness, and implied that he would be very interested in listening to this episode once it airs.
Yeah, and I don't really know how that works.
I have no idea either, but apparently we have at least one six-dimensional fan.
I hope he's listening on YouTube because it's kind of hard to get episodes on Spotify right now.
Yeah, we're working
If he's
on
if he's listening on Twitch, I kind of want to know how. Because that's live.
So, yeah, that's actually a really good segue. We are on. Obviously, we do these live episodes on Twitch, and we release the VODs. Since Twitch only allows us to keep them up for so many days, we do audiovisual backups to YouTube on Bad Occult Advice. If you look us up on YouTube, you'll find us. We also have, we're still working on getting everything sorted out with the RSS feed, but we do have episode 1?
Episode 1 is available on Spotify, Apple, etc. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty understanding how Substack does RSS. If you know how to do this, could you please light a candle, put a pyramid on top of your head, and telepathy me the instructions on how to do it?
Or if you don't quite feel comfortable with the telepathy directly to Felix's brain, understandable considering some of the discussions that we had earlier about said brain, you can always email us at badoccultadvice@gmail.com. We do have that set up now. Or you can send us a Tumblr ask on tumblr.com/badoccultadvice. We are finalizing the Etsy Bad Occult Apothecary. Right now we are going to be having a lot of hawthorn stuff. Dried leaves, dried berries, thorns, eventually maybe some wands if we can figure out an economical way to ship those. As well as, do you want to talk about the other thing?
I don't remember what the other thing is. Are we going to say who's doing that?
You can if you want.
So, I got tired of doing divination online years ago, but Rob hasn't yet. If you want Rob to do you a Lenormand Grand Tableau, that will be available. He's very good at it.
And so what would be available on that is a picture of the full Grand Tableau as he's laid it out, and an audio recording of him going through the reading. He probably wouldn't go through the way. It's actually really interesting to watch him do readings. We might have to have him do a sample one. But definitely an interesting thing. We're still finalizing those details, but keep an eye on Bad Occult Apothecary. You can like the shop. I'm not as familiar with Etsy as I am.
You can favorite or bookmark it or something like that.
So once we come out of vacation mode, all those things will be available. So, anything else that you want to plug?
I'm gonna be honest. My forebrain, my prefrontal cortex is trying to tap out.
All right, so we are going to wrap it up with that to give Felix's prefrontal cortex and his poor little brain a rest.
That was a lot. We had one guy, another guy, and then I came in and there was one guy and another guy. Was that how it went? I was there in the middle somewhere. It was just like a bunch of guys, and now I nap.
Now you nap. Yes. So, as always, this has been the Bad Occult Podcast. This was episode 4, continuation of our summoning discussion, discussing the aftermath of our summoning experiment and experience. As always, I have been Tyler Cadmian, aka Shadow, and with me, as always,
it's Felix S. Warren for now.
For now.
But watch this space. It could be someone else. It could be.
Tune in next time to find out what other shenanigans we've been getting up to. And we will talk to you all in the next episode. Bye.